Hello everyone, and welcome back. Forget the history you were taught in school. Forget the sanitized chronicles of emperors and empires, of marble statues and stoic virtues. Today we descend into the shadows, into a story so drenched in blood, madness, and paranoia that it feels more like a nightmare than history. It's a story about a boy who was once the darling of the Roman legions, a figure of immense hope, a boy whose nickname meant Little Boot, and how that boy became a monster. Or did he? That is the question that haunts the memory of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the man we know as Caligula. The story you think you know is one of divine ambition, incestuous desires, and a horse that was nearly appointed consul. It's the story of an emperor who waged war on the ocean. But what if that story, the one passed down for 2,000 years, is a lie? What if it's the most successful character assassination in history? A masterpiece of political propaganda crafted by the very men who drove a dagger into his heart. To find the truth, we can't start with the monster. We have to go back to the mud and steel of the Rhine frontier, where the fate of an empire and the sanity of its future ruler was being forged in fire and betrayal. Our story begins not in the gilded halls of Rome, but in the chaos of the northern frontier. Here the legions are restless. For years they have served under the aging, reclusive Emperor Tiberius, a man who rules from a distant island, a spectre of an emperor. But their loyalty, their love, belongs to one man, Germanicus. He is everything Tiberius is not. He is young, charismatic, a brilliant general, and the adopted son of the emperor himself. He is the people's champion, and at his side is his family, a living symbol of Roman virtue. His wife, Agrippina the elder, a woman of iron, will and a direct descendant of the great Augustus. And their children, among them a young boy named Gaius. This isn't a prince locked away in a palace. This is a child of the legions. He grows up among the soldiers, breathing in the smell of leather and campfire smoke. They adore him. As a toddler, his mother dresses him in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny hobnailed boots, the caligae. The hardened veterans, men who have faced down Germanic tribesmen in the dark forests, are utterly charmed. They give him a nickname, an affectionate, almost playful name, Caligula. Little Boot, he is their mascot, their good luck charm, the living embodiment of their beloved general's legacy. It's a happy image, isn't it? A golden childhood, but beneath the surface, the politics of Rome are a venomous serpent, and its fangs are already reaching for Germanicus and his family. Tiberius, ruling from his decadent exile on the island of Capri, sees Germanicus not as a son, but as a rival. The man's popularity is a threat. Every victory Germanicus wins on the battlefield is another blow to the emperor's own fragile authority. A decision is made. Germanicus is recalled from the Rhine and sent to the east, a mission cloaked in honor, but reeking of political exile. And there, in Antioch, in the year 19 AD, the hero of Rome falls ill. Suddenly, violently. He dies convinced he has been poisoned, and on his deathbed he makes his friends swear an oath to avenge him. The prime suspect is the governor of Syria, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, a known confidante of Tiberius. The message is clear, even if it can't be proven. No one is safe, not even the son of Augustus. The death of Germanicus sends a shockwave through the empire. His wife, Agrippina, returns to Rome, not in a triumphal procession, but in a funeral cortege, clutching the ashes of her husband. The Roman people weep openly in the streets. They see her not just as a grieving widow, but as the last bastion of a noble lineage against a corrupt and paranoid emperor. And that makes her and her children a target. Little Caligula, the army's darling, is now the orphan of a suspected assassination. The son of a woman on a collision course with the most powerful man in the world. The golden childhood is over. The age of fear has begun. Imagine being a child and watching your world dismantled, piece by piece, by an unseen hand. After his father's death, Caligula and his siblings are caught in a political storm. Their mother, Agrippina, is relentless in her quest for justice, openly accusing Tiberius of orchestrating Germanicus's murder. It is a brave act, but a foolish one. In the paranoid court of Tiberius, bravery is just another word for treason. The emperor's right handman, a ruthless political operator named Sejanus, sees his opportunity. Sejanus is the commander of the Praetorian Guard, and his ambition knows no bounds. He wants the throne for himself, and the family of Germanicus is in his way. He begins to whisper in the emperor's ear, feeding his paranoia, twisting Agrippina's grief into a plot for power. One by one, Caligula's family is eliminated. His two older brothers, Nero and Drusus, are arrested on trumped, up charges of treason. They are declared enemies of the state. Nero is exiled to a desolate island and starved to death. Drusus is locked in a dungeon beneath the imperial palace in Rome, where he is driven to madness by hunger, chewing the stuffing from his own mattress before he dies. Their mother, the proud Agrippina, is also exiled, eventually taking her own life in despair. Caligula is a teenager now. He has seen his father die, his brothers murdered, his mother destroyed. He is utterly alone, save for his 3 sisters, and he lives in a state of constant, gnawing terror. Every friendly face could be a spy, every meal could be poisoned, every word. He learns a vital lesson, the one that will define the rest of his life. To survive, you must become invisible. You must wear a mask. He perfects an attitude of absolute subservience. He shows no emotion, no ambition, no trace of the grief and rage that must be boiling inside him. He is a ghost in his own home. And then the summons comes. In the year 31 AD, Emperor Tiberius, the man who destroyed his family, calls for him. Caligula, now around 19 years old, is to come to the island of Capri. It is not an invitation. It is a command. To refuse his death, to accept. Might also be death. He is being called into the serpent's nest, to live side by side with the monster who haunts his dreams. The journey to Capri is a journey into the... This island is the stuff of grim legend throughout the empire. It is Tiberius's personal kingdom, a fortress of paranoia and debauchery, far from the prying eyes of the Roman Senate. Here the aging emperor, now in his 70s, indulges in every vice imaginable, surrounded by astrologers, sycophants, and executioners. The stories that leak out from Capri are horrifying. Tales of torture, of secret executions where victims are thrown from the cliffs into the sea. It is a place where hope goes to die, and this is where Caligula must now live. He is a prisoner in a gilded cage. He walks a tightrope every single day. One wrong word, one flicker of resentment in his eyes, and he will follow his brothers into an early grave. Suetonius, one of our main sources for this period, tells us that Caligula understood the game perfectly. He became the ultimate actor. He molded himself to Tiberius's every whim, flattering him, serving him, never once betraying his true feelings. He was, in the words of one contemporary, the best servant and the worst master. He watches. He studies the mechanic. He sees how absolute power, combined with absolute paranoia, can corrupt a man's soul. He is living in a masterclass of tyranny, taught by the tyrant himself. Is this where Caligula's own mind began to fracture? Was he so deeply traumatized by his past, so twisted by the psychological torment of Capri, that he was already on the path to madness? Or was he something else entirely? A cold, calculating survivor, biding his time, wearing the mask of a sycophant, while nursing a deep, burning desire for revenge and power. For 6 years he plays this deadly game. He outlives Sejanus, the man who destroyed his family, watching as Tiberius turns on his own favorite and has him brutally executed. A new Praetorian prefect rises to take his place, and Macro, a shrewd political operator, sees in Caligula not a threat, but an opportunity. He sees the future. Tiberius is old. He cannot live forever. The emperor has 2 potential heirs, Caligula, the son of the beloved Germanicus, and his own young grandson, Tiberius Gemellus. But Gemellus is just a boy. Caligula has the name, the lineage, and a secret alliance is formed. Macro protects Caligula, whispers his praises to the emperor, and prepares the ground for the inevitable transition of power. In March of 37 AD, the moment arrives. The Emperor Tiberius, at the age of 77, falls ill. The end is near, the air on Capri is thick with tension. What happens next is a blur of conflicting accounts. A scene shrouded in rumor and suspicion. Some say Tiberius died naturally. Others tell a darker story. They say the old emperor experienced a sudden recovery, and that Macro, fearing the consequences if he lived, gave the order. The Praetorian prefect allegedly instructed Caligula to finish the job, and they smothered the old man with a pillow. We will never know the truth. But one fact is undeniable. The serpent was dead. Caligula, the little boot, the orphan boy who had survived the systematic destruction of his family, the prisoner of the island of monsters, was now the sole master of the Roman world. The news of Tiberius's death reaches Rome, and the city erupts not in mourning but in celebration. The people pour into the streets, chanting, "To the Tiber with Tiberius," the traditional cry for the bodies of tyrants, and into this city filled with hope and relief, Caligula makes his grand entrance. It is a spectacle of triumph. He is no longer the cowering boy from Capri. He is the son of Germanicus returned. He accompanies his great uncle's funeral procession with performative grief, but everyone knows the truth. A dark chapter has closed. A new day has dawned. The Roman people look at him, and they see everything they had lost. They see the handsome, charismatic features of his father. They see a living connection to the golden age of Augustus. Hope is a powerful force, and all the hopes of the Roman, and for a while it seems that their faith is justified. The first few months of Caligula's reign are a whirlwind of popular reforms. It is a golden age. He delivers a speech to the Senate promising cooperation and an end to the fear that defined Tiberius's rule. He burns the records of the treason trials, declaring an end to the network of spies and informers that had terrorized the aristocracy. He recalls political exiles, the victims of his predecessor's paranoia. He abolishes unpopular taxes and spends lavishly on public entertainment. He hosts magnificent gladiatorial games, chariot races, and theatrical performances. He throws money to the crowds, literally. He is seen everywhere, engaging with the people, a stark contrast to the reclusive Tiberius. He seems to be the perfect emperor. He pays the bequests left in Tiberius's will, even though the will had been nullified. He even adopts his young cousin, Tiberius Gemellus, the boy who had a rival claim to the throne, as his own son and co-heir. It is a gesture of magnanimity, a signal that the era of bloody family purges is over. The army loves him, the people adore him. Even the Senate, always suspicious of an emperor's power, is cautiously optimistic. For the first time in a generation, a wave of genuine joy and relief washes over Rome. The son of Germanicus has fulfilled his destiny. The nightmare is over, or so it seemed. 7 months into his reign, the dream turns sour. Caligula falls gravely ill. The nature of the sickness is a mystery. The ancient sources are vague. Was it a fever, epilepsy? Or was it, as some whispered, an attempt on his life by poison? The entire empire holds its breath. The popular young emperor, the source of all their hopes, lies at death's door. The public grief is immense. Crowds gather at the palace, keeping vigil day and night. People make vows to the gods, offering their own lives in exchange for his. But then, against all odds, Caligula rises from his sick-bed, but the man who returns is not the same one who fell ill. Something has changed. The light in his eyes has been replaced by a disturbing glint. The charming, benevolent ruler is gone. In his place is someone different, unpredictable, dangerous. The golden age of Caligula is over. The reign of Caligula is over. The reign of terror is about to begin. The first sign that something is deeply wrong comes swiftly and brutally. Tiberius Gemellus, the young cousin Caligula had adopted as his heir, is the first to go. The official story is that Gemellus was plotting against the emperor. The reality is that he was forced to commit suicide. The gesture of magnanimity was a sham. Caligula saw a rival, and he eliminated him. Next is Macro, the Praetorian prefect who had been his greatest ally, the man who arguably put him on the throne. Macro and his wife are also forced to take their own lives. Their crime: they knew too much. They had seen Caligula as a puppet, and he was now cutting the strings. His own father-in-law is executed. The purges begin. The treason trials, which he had so publicly abolished, are brought back with a vengeance. This time they are not about political security, they are about money. Caligula's lavish spending had drained the Roman treasury. The vast fortune left by the notoriously frugal Tiberius is gone. Caligula needs cash, and the fastest way to get it is to confiscate the estates of wealthy senators. Accusations of treason become a tool of extortion. Men are condemned on the flimsiest of evidence, their property seized by the state. The atmosphere in Rome turns from hope to fear. The Senate, which had welcomed him as a partner, now sees him as a predator. They are trapped, forced to applaud his every action, while knowing that any one of them could be next. And then the stories begin stories that go beyond mere political cruelty. Stories of a mind unhinged. The whispers start in the corridors of the palace, spread to the forums and the bathhouses. They speak of the emperor's bizarre behavior, his sleepless nights spent wandering the palace, calling for the dawn. They talk of his conversations with the moon, and with the statue of Jupiter, whom he alternately threatens and cajoles as an equal. He begins to insist on being treated as a living god. This isn't entirely new. Deceased emperors were often deified, but Caligula demands worship while he is still alive. He builds a temple to himself. He establishes a priesthood in his own honor, with the most prominent senators forced to pay exorbitant sums to serve as his priests. His own horse is among the first to be inducted. He even connects his palace on the Palatine Hill directly to the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill with a bridge, so he can visit his brother god without having to descend among mere mortals. To the traditional Roman aristocracy, this is not just arrogance. It is sacrilege. It is a madness that threatens the very fabric of their society. And it is here that we encounter the most famous and most bizarre legend of Caligula's reign. The story of Incitatus, the horse. According to the histories of Suetonius and Cassius Dio, written decades after his death, Caligula's love for his favorite horse, Incitatus, bordered on obsession. The horse lived in a marble stable with an ivory manger. It wore a collar of precious jewels and blankets of royal purple. It had its own staff of slaves to attend to its every need. Guests were formally invited to dine with the horse. So far, it's the eccentricity of a man with absolute power and infinite wealth. But then the story takes a turn for the absurd. The sources claim that Caligula planned to elevate Incitatus to the highest office in the Roman state. He was going to make his horse a consul. This is the story that has defined Caligula for 2 millennia. It's the ultimate proof of his insanity. A ruler so detached from reality that he would give the reins of government to an animal. But let's pause here. Let's step back from the storytellers. Our main sources, Suetonius and Cassius Dio, were both members of the senatorial class. They were writing for an audience of senators, and the Roman Senate absolutely despised Caligula. He humiliated them, he terrified them, he executed them, and he bankrupted them. Is it possible this story isn't literal? What if it was a calculated act of political theater, a piece of performance art designed for maximum insult? The position of consul was the pinnacle of a senator's career. It was a source of immense pride and prestige. By suggesting that his horse could do the job, Caligula wasn't just being crazy. He was delivering the most profound insult imaginable. He was telling the assembled senators of Rome, "You are so useless, so sycophantic, so irrelevant, that my horse is more qualified to lead than any of you." It was a demonstration of absolute contempt, an act of psychological warfare. Was it the act of a madman? Or was it the act of a ruthless autocrat using satire as a weapon to break the spirit of his political opponents? The truth is, we don't know for sure if he ever actually said it. The sources are clear that this was his dent plantante, but he was assassinated before it could happen. It is assassinated before it could happen. It is a subtle but important distinction. The story could easily have been exaggerated by his... The story of the horse is just the beginning. The emperor's behavior becomes more and more erratic, his projects more grandiose. In 39 AD, he marches the Roman legions north. The objective, the conquest of Britain, a prize that had eluded even the great Julius Caesar. It is to be his great military triumph, the achievement that will cement his legacy as a conqueror like his father Germanicus. The legions assemble on the coast of Gaul, facing the English Channel. The invasion fleet is prepared. The soldiers are ready, the tension is palpable, and then Caligula gives one of the most baffling orders in military history. The invasion is called off. Instead, he commands his legions to deploy in battle formation along the beach. He rides before them. The trumpets sound the charge, and he orders his men to attack the ocean. The Roman soldiers, the most disciplined fighting force in the ancient world, are ordered to wade into the surf and stab at the waves with their swords. And then he declares victory. He tells his troops to collect seashells from the beach. These shells, he proclaims, are the spoils of the ocean, the plunder taken from the conquered sea god, Neptune. He then marches back towards Rome to claim a formal military triumph for this glorious victory. Like the story of the horse, this tale has been held up as ironclad proof of insanity. A man who literally declares war on the sea must be mad. But once again, if we look closer, other possibilities emerge. What if this wasn't madness, but a bizarre form of punishment? We know that just before this incident there had been a conspiracy against Caligula among his own commanders in the army. The plot was discovered, and the ringleaders were executed. Armies that conspire against their emperor are often punished. The traditional punishment is decimation, the killing of every 10th man. Perhaps Caligula, for all his cruelty, didn't want to slaughter his own soldiers. What if instead he chose to humiliate them? What could be more humiliating for a proud Roman legionary than being ordered to collect seashells like a child? It was a symbolic gesture, a way of saying, "You are not worthy of a real battle. Your new enemy is the water at your feet." It turns the story from an act of lunacy into an act of calculated, albeit deeply strange, psychological. Another theory suggests a simple misunderstanding, the Latin word for seashell. Musculi was also army slang for the huts of engineers. Is it possible Caligula ordered his men to dismantle their siege huts? And the story was twisted by his detractors into the more sensational tale of collecting shells. We can't be certain, but what is certain is that the Caligula we see in the historical record is a man of extremes. His cruelty is matched only by his dark, sardonic wit. He forces senators to run for miles alongside his chariot. He opens a brothel in the palace itself, staffed by the wives and daughters of prominent citizens, to raise money for the treasury. He laments that his reign isn't marked by some great disaster, like an earthquake or a plague, so that it will be remembered by history. He allegedly wishes that the Roman people had but one neck, so he could sever it with a single blow. The stories of his sexual depravity are legendary. He is accused of orgies, of sleeping with the wives of his guests, and most scandalously, of incest with his 3 sisters, particularly his favorite, Drusilla. When Drusilla dies suddenly, his grief is terrifying in its intensity. He declares her a goddess, the first Roman woman to be so honored. He enforces a period of public mourning so strict that to laugh, to bathe, or to dine with one's family is a capital crime. Is this the obsessive grief of a broken mind, or is it a calculated political move, elevating his own family to divine status to further solidify his own claims to godhood? With Caligula, every action exists on this knife's edge between madness and political calculation. Was he a paranoid tyrant lashing out at his enemies? Yes. Was he a megalomaniac with a god complex? Almost certainly. But was he clinically insane? Or was he a man who had grown up in a world of absolute terror, learned that the only way to be safe was to be feared, and then applied those lessons with a terrifying theatrical flair once he held absolute power? He had seen what happened to those who were merely popular, like his father. He had seen what happened to those who were merely feared, like Tiberius. Perhaps he decided he needed to be a living god, a figure so unpredictable and so terrifying that no one would ever dare to move against him. It was a fatal miscalculation. While Caligula terrorized the Senate and played games with the army, the real threat was growing closer to home, within the walls of his own palace. It came not from a powerful senator or an ambitious general, but from a man he had personally and repeatedly Chaerea was an officer in the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who served as the emperor's personal bodyguards. He was an older man, a veteran who had served since the time of Augustus, and he had a high-pitched, reedy voice. Caligula found this endlessly amusing. He mocked Chaerea relentlessly, in public and in private. He would give him obscene passwords for the daily military watch, words like Priapus or Venus, crude references to sex. When Chaerea would come to thank him for something, Caligula would extend his hand for a kiss, but make an obscene, suggestive gesture with it. For a proud, aging soldier like Chaerea, these were not just jokes. They were daily, public humiliations that stripped him of his dignity and honor. And that hatred, born of personal insult, became the spark that lit the final conspiracy. But Chaerea was not alone. The plot against Caligula was a broad coalition of the desperate and the ambitious. There were other praetorian officers who feared the emperor's erratic moods. There were senators who had seen their friends and family members executed, their wealth confiscated. They saw an emperor who was not only cruel, but also a threat to the entire Roman system. They feared his plan to move the capital of the empire from Rome to Alexandria in Egypt, turning his back on the city and its traditions. The conspirators began to meet in secret. They knew the risks, failure, agonizing death. But to do nothing felt like a death sentence of its own. Who would Caligula's paranoia target next? No one felt safe. The plan was to strike during the Palatine Games, a festival held in honor of the Emperor Augustus. The games were held at the Imperial Palace, a sprawling complex of buildings, theaters, and private corridors. It was a place Caligula felt secure, surrounded by his loyal German bodyguard. The conspirators' first attempt failed. They lost their nerve. The sheer presence of the emperor, the god emperor, was too intimidating. Caligula seemed to have an almost supernatural aura of invincibility. It was said he could sense plots against him. Days passed. The festival was nearing its end. The conspirators were getting desperate. If they waited too long, their plot would surely be discovered. The date was set for the 24th of January, 41 AD. The final day of the games. That day, Caligula was in a good mood. He had been sacrificing to the gods, and the omens were reportedly bad. A soothsayer had warned him to beware the 30 days. Some say he had even been warned to beware of a man named Cassius. But Caligula laughed it off. He believed himself to be untouchable. After watching the morning's performances, he decided to leave the theatre to go to his private baths. He would normally use a public route, but his advisers persuaded him to take a secluded underground passage, a cryptoporticus, that ran beneath the palace. It was a fatal decision. This was the spot the conspirators had chosen. The passage was narrow, isolated, and away from his loyal German bodyguards. As Caligula walked through the dim corridor, chatting with a group of young actors, the trap was sprung. The first to act was Cassius Chaerea. He approached the emperor from behind and asked him for the day's password. Caligula, true to form, gave him another lewd, mocking word. Chaerea's response was not a word, but a blade. "Take this." He shouted and drove his sword into Caligula's neck, just below the collarbone. The blow wasn't fatal, but it staggered the emperor. Caligula turned, blood pouring from the wound, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He tried to run. But there was nowhere to go. The other conspirators, their fear now replaced by a frenzied bloodlust, closed in. Another officer, Cornelius Sabinus, stabbed him in the chest. They swarmed him, a flurry of daggers and swords. The boy who was called Little Boot, the man who called himself a god, fell to the floor of the dark tunnel. But they didn't stop. They continued to stab him, over and over, driven by years of pent-up fear and hatred. The sources say he was stabbed more than 30 times. His last words, according to one account, were a defiant cry, "I am still alive." The murder was a brutal, savage affair. When the German bodyguards finally learned what had happened, they flew into a rage. They were too late to save their emperor. But they could avenge him. They rampaged through the palace, cutting down anyone they found, conspirator and innocent alike. But the deed was done. The god was dead. The chaos didn't end in the tunnel. In the frenzy that followed, the assassins sought to wipe out Caligula's entire line. They found his wife, Melonia Caesonia, in the palace. They murdered her without hesitation, and then they found their daughter, Julia Drusilla, a child barely 2 years old. They took the toddler by the ankles and smashed her head against a wall. It was a final, horrifying act of damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. They didn't just want to kill the man, they wanted to erase him, his name, his bloodline, from the face of the earth. In the Senate, there was a moment of brief, heady optimism. With the tyrant gone, some senators argued for a return to the old ways, for the restoration of the Roman Republic. But it was a fantasy. The Republic was a ghost, long dead. The real power in Rome no longer resided with the Senate. It resided with the army, specifically the Praetorian Guard. While the senators debated, a group of Praetorian Guard, Praetorian Gepallas. Hiding behind a curtain, trembling in fear, they found a man. It was Caligula's uncle, Claudius. Claudius was the black sheep of the imperial family. He was bookish, awkward, afflicted with a limp and a stammer. He had been the butt of Caligula's jokes, considered a harmless fool, but the soldiers saw something else. They saw a member of the imperial family, a direct link to Augustus. A figurehead they could control. In a scene that bordered on farce, they dragged the terrified Claudius from behind the curtain, threw him on their shoulders, and proclaimed him the new emperor. The Senate had no choice but to accept. The brief dream of a restored republic was over. The age of emperors would continue, and one of the first acts of the new regime was to shape the memory of the old one. The official narrative had to be written, a narrative that justified the brutal assassination of an emperor and the murder of his family. Caligula couldn't be remembered as a shrewd but cruel autocrat. That would make his assassins look like opportunistic murderers. No, he had to be remembered as something else. He had to be a monster. A depraved lunatic whose death was a necessary act to save Rome from itself. And so the stories were gathered. Every eccentric act, every cruel joke, every grandiose project was stripped of its context and presented as evidence of a diseased mind. The story of making his horse a consul wasn't presented as a political insult, but as a literal. The war on the sea wasn't a punishment for mutinous troops, but a genuine battle against the waves. The incest, the orgies, the conversations with the moon sant every rumor. Every piece of gossip was cemented into the historical record by writers like Suetonius and Tacitus, men who wrote to please the new imperial dynasty and the senatorial class that had despised Caligula. They created a caricature, a pantomime villain of such epic insanity that he became almost cartoonish. And their version of the story is the one that has endured for 2,000 years. So we are left with our question. Who was the real Caligula? Was he the monster of the legends, a man driven mad by absolute power, a deranged tyrant who deserved his bloody end? Or was he something more? Was he a product of his terrifying upbringing, a deeply traumatized man who saw conspiracies in every shadow because he had grown up watching his family be destroyed by them? Was he a brilliant, if ruthless, political performer, using the performance of madness as a tool of control, pushing the boundaries of imperial power in a way that his successors would later adopt? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the murky space between these two He was almost certainly a cruel, narcissistic, and paranoid ruler. The executions were real. The terror was real. But was he insane? Or was his reign an object lesson in what happens when you give a deeply damaged young man, a man who has known nothing but betrayal and violence, unlimited power over the known world? The history of Caligula is a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. The narrative we have was written by his enemies, by the victors who needed to justify their actions. His own voice is silent. We see him only through a distorted lens, a funhouse mirror that reflects the fears and hatreds of his chroniclers. The story of Little Boot is a cautionary tale. It shows us that history is not just a collection of facts, but a story, and stories are always told by someone for a reason. Caligula's story was told to turn a political assassination into a righteous act of tyrannicide, and they succeeded so completely that for 20 centuries we have looked at the name Caligula and seen only a madman, not the complex, terrifying and perhaps tragic figure who truly lies beneath the layers of propaganda. The monster may be more myth than man, a phantom created by the daggers that brought him. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.